Rick's going to give me a tap when I have a minute left to organize everything. Rick just spoke of one aim of this panel is to consider where we've come from and where we're going, and certainly we must at this wonderful, wonderful moment. I mean, I'm so overwhelmed by what you have done and so proud of all of us for being here. But, there are many of our sisters and brothers who are not here with us, and I'd like to share with you our love for those who have been with us in this incredible adventure. Certainly Aldous Huxley, thank God, Bob Daas and Laura will update us on his wonderful career as our coach at Harvard. It was all Alice's fault. And our dear brother Alan Watts, and of course we all wish that John Lilly were here, and he is here. The man that was our partner in time when we started Harvard, Frank Barron, who sends his best wishes. And, I mean, I could go on and on. I was just about to say Abby Hoffman. Abby Hoffman is exactly the next word I was going to say there. I was lucky enough, I don't call it lucky enough, but honored enough to be with Abby on the occasion of his last public speech, and I tell you, he went out with all of his firing every way. He went out really in a blaze of glory, publicly. I think Michael Harwitz, the archivist, and Cindy are here. I could go on. You know, I have a long list of names, but you know what happens. You kind of, I kind of forget. I have to warn audiences, that my brain shows the effect of good use. I mean, the altitudes and velocities that I've navigated my brain. It's true of you. On the psychopharmaceutical side here, it's an old joke, but why not tell it again? There are three very serious side effects of psychotropic botanical products. The first is long-term memory gain. In 1 second, you can take it from the amoeba to Dan Quayle. If that's evolution. Anyway, and the second side effect of psychotropic vegetables is short-term memory loss, and I forget the third. In giving tribute to, I think I got to give tribute to John Lennon. And it's not just those of us that we have been honored to know, but my brothers and sisters, I'm sure you're aware of the fact that we in this room belong to a long and honorable chain of visionary explorers and brain navigators and mystics who have gone as far within as they could. Just in this country, this is the third psychedelic revolution that our country's been through. I must pay tribute to the people that we got to know by history, at least, at Harvard. The second psychedelic revolution took place, or started in Cambridge, around the turn of the century. William James founded the first psychological laboratory in this country and wrote that incredible book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. That was nitrous oxide, hashish, and opium. Oliver Wendell Holmes, you know. I think we must pay tribute to, as we always do, to the writers like Ginsberg and William Burroughs. But in the second revolution, Mark Twain was probably the most outspoken advocate of brain navigation. Indeed, he talked Ulysses S. Grant into getting a little neurological assistance. Grant, you know, was writing his autobiography. He needed the money, and he had a terrible writer's block. So Mark Twain got a doctor to prescribe cocaine for him, and thus the world got Ulysses S. Grant autobiography. I know this is not the place where you're supposed to mention things like cocaine, so I won't. I'm not a great fan of cocaine's. As William Burroughs said to me about a month ago, he said, "I don't like any drug that makes me twitch." Then we had the first psychedelic revolution in this country, and again started in Cambridge. The enemy of the second, we've got our war on drugs now. The enemy that William James and his crew faced with the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And of course, the first revolution, which took place in Cambridge, the enemy then was people like Cotton Mather and the Salem witchcraft trials, and then later came Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was in very close touch. Michael Horowitz can give you the fingerprints and dates and all of this, but he's in very close touch with the psychedelic poets in England at the time. Margaret Fuller, probably the founder of women's liberation in this country. Hashish and opium. Michael and Cindy delighted me about a month ago when they quoted line of one of my great heroes, Thoreau, David Henry Thoreau. It was interesting, you know, when he went to jail for passive, nonviolent resistance to the government in Washington, D.C., and by the time when Emerson came and said, "What are you doing in there?" and he says, "What are you doing out there, Ralph?" Do you know why he was in jail? I mean, it's talk about deja vu again. He was in jail for not paying a tax that was gone to support the Mexican War. So this long series of warfares, holy warfares of the industrial northerners against the vegetable growers of the South. I mean, Thoreau, by the way, it was ether. I'm not advocating. But he, this great line about if you want to visit the stars, try ether. Could we be here, or would we be here in this moment of exaltation and sense of positive growth if we had not had in the last 6 months probably the 6 most glorious months in human history? I'm talking, of course, about the events. I mean, we all feel it, and I know when you saw the video shots coming from Tiananmen Square, and you saw 100,000, 300,000, 1 million young Chinese students, and you saw that look in their eye, that Woodstock gleam, and you saw them with the headbands and the V sign, and they had the old Abby Hoffman trick. They learned it for television. They knew how to play the cameras. They were throwing the flowers at the tanks and saying, "Soldiers, we love you." I mean, and then, of course, the Berlin Wall coming down. The last, Ram Dass and I had a wonderful Christmas phone call, and we both shared our joy that in a small way, and in a sense a larger way, everything we've been doing was part of the evolution of youth, the new breed that brought that wall down, because it was individual freedom. I personally would give giving out Academy Oscars for who brought the wall down, I would name 3 wonderful prophets of our time that influenced me and that I was fortunate enough to meet. The first of all, of course, was Benjamin Spock. Benjamin Spock taught quantum psychology, and he said to the parents, "Treat your kids as individuals." I mean, that's the most powerful statement that's ever been made, preparing us for the information age when you got to climb into your brain. There's only one person can run a brain, and that's the individual. The second person, who is not an American, is a Swiss gentleman and also a doctor. Dr. Spock and Dr. Hoffman, I mean, although he's one of the great organic chemists of our time, we all know that he is a very deeply cultured man with a deep roots in the tradition of German and Swiss and European mysticism, so that he just didn't happen to ride that funny bicycle home that day and think it was a psychiatric episode. I mean, he'd seen the guidebooks. He knew what was going on, and there was a wonderful tribute for Albert. Remember, Bob, in Hollywood, and there's a big St. James Club, and all these people were out there all dressed up in Sunday, you know, and I was introduced. I said, you know, Hoffman wrote a book called LSD, My Problem Child, and I said, Albert, they're your children. And a third, who's the third person I'm going to mention? The third doctor, Marshall McLuhan. Because, number one, Marshall McLuhan was always a strong supporter of the psychedelic movement in this country in the 60s. He actually told me, he was his, I get the credit, but it was his script by him. He told me the words that turn out, to be the American translation of Glasnost and Perestroika. He said, Timothy, tell him, turn on, tune in, and drop out. Think about it. Yeah, it was Hoffman, and I mean, it was McLuhan. Okay.
Fourth person, too.
What?
There's a fourth person.
Who's that?
Timothy Leary.
Oh, come on, the Richard Alpert. No, come on. Yeah, Richard Alpert. Yeah. Now, it's no news to you there's a war on drugs out there. In the history of religious insanity and holy wars, I think this one takes the cake. I mean, the absolute... we knew at Harvard after about a year that we're going to have a little trouble with... there was a taboo against the brain. You're not supposed to tamper with the brain in an industrial society, and we found that out right away. And there were many times after a while we'd sit around and we'd say, well, these psychedelic drugs are psychotomimetic. They create serious mental confusion, paranoia, hysterical hallucinations in deans and government officials who have not taken it. One thing that's true, of course, in a war, there's no more, it's all propaganda. And the one weapon we have, and we're going to talk about what's going to happen. By the way, my script is very positive. I mean, evolution didn't work for 2 billion years to create the human brain with its wonderful receptor sites, to let people like Tsar Bennett and his ilk stop it all. Each of us in our own ways have to follow Orwell's basic prescription. In times of Big Brother insanity, your first job is to remain sane yourself. And number two, look around and you'll find there are a lot of people with twinkling eyes that are sane with you. But each of us has to do this in our own way. When Rick said to me that he hoped I would give advice as to how we could get government permission to do research on psychedelic drugs, I'm definitely beyond the government permission situation. I mean, like several hundred million East Europeans fuck the government. I mean, let's go on for them. But also, one way I've found to get common sense. Common sense is so important. I'll give you 3 little common sense things you can do. I was on a radio program talking to someone in Mississippi, Alabama, and somebody talking about marijuana. You know, they say marijuana kills, and I said, marijuana is really not very dangerous. I think it's the least dangerous thing around. And this old farm guy says that, well, I'd like to talk to you, Dr. Leary. He says, you say that marijuana is not dangerous. It seriously injured my son, Billy. I said, oh, gee, I'm sorry. What happened to Billy? He said, well, the damn fool went out of the barn and made a mistake, and half a ton of it landed on his arm. Another great one, about 6 months ago, there was a full-page ad in the LA Times, the New York Times, the Pravda. I mean, every Times, every paper in the country had this enormous big full-page ad, all white space except a frying pan. And in the frying pan is a frying egg, and it says, this is your brain on drugs. So there's always a counterculture. There's always the underground. It happened in the Soviet Union. It's happening here. I got about 5 copies of another advertisement. Same idea, white space. It's a plate now, and on this plate is a fried egg with 2 pieces of bacon and some toast. And it said, this is your brain with bacon and buttered toast. That's just common sense. Well, I don't want you to feel that because I'm making fun of the drug crusaders that I'm not compassionate. We've got to be tremendously empathetic and understand that the people who run the industrial age and run the machinery, they're in despair. It's all over. They know that old thing is not going to work anymore. They're all out of jobs. I mean, for example, when the wall went down, there's no more evil empire to fight. I was debating G. Gordon Liddy 2 nights ago in Chicago, and I said, Gordon, he's not changed at all. He's still talking about America's a little old lady in the streets. We need big guns around. I said, Gordon, as your friend, I've got to intervene now and take you to the Betty Ford Clinic to help you break your gun habit. I mean, I know it's hard, Gordon. You're suffering some severe enemy deprivation. I do feel sorry for millions of sincere people who, of course, there are many reasons. There are many reasons why there is this war on drugs. One is because they have to have the Cromwellian Calvinist Protestants who run this country have to have someone to war on, and so they got the war on drugs. But deeper than that, there are profound religious issues here. And as Terence McKenna has told us so many times, in the old days when it was all one and we were all pagans, vegetables, you'd be eating cocoa leaves, and it was all part of nature, and you couldn't talk about the individual and the individual brain because there was no individual and no brain. In the industrial age, as you well know, and Richard, I look back on it, you cannot allow people in an industrial, mass assembly, factory society to tamper with their brains. You simply can't allow it. I mean, this is why you have the robots. We're all here in the robot. You're a doctor, and I'm a lawyer, and you're a minister, and you're a professor, and you're a policeman, and you're a criminal. Sorry, but we have you, too. But everyone's got our job, and you can't have people tampering with their brains like robots suddenly poking around inside. As we move into the information age, the communication age, the meaning of the information age is, of course, the discovery of the brain. So I would say year 2000, the 21st century is going to be the century of the brain. And I give credit to the great explorers of Magellan and Columbus and Huxley and who just helped us discover. By the way, interesting, Richard. Remember, Aldous Huxley used the metaphors of discovering and going across to the Antipodes and like Australians finding things and coming back. That whole, it's so. I've gone over my time, haven't I?
No, that's okay.
Okay, I'll go one more minute here. The thing is that the brain has evolved over 2 billion years, and it's not our fault, but the brain, DNA has decided that the brain needs certain psychoactive or brain-activating plants and foods. I mean, there's been this wonderful symmetry and the synergy between the plant kingdom and the queendom and the animal kingdom, to whatever you want to call it, that the brain needs these substances. I hate to break the news to Czar Bennett, but, you got the human brain definitely not on your side in this. What's going to happen in the next 4 or 5 years, the advanced underground psychedelic counterculture of the computer software industry, many of whom are in this room right now, are producing something called artificial reality gear, virtual reality gear. I call it electronic software, WAR. These are suits. You climb into a computer, you know about it, you put your goggles on, but the goggles are screens, and then you produce any kind of, you create any reality you want. Say, shall we meet for lunch? Shall we meet in Taj Mahal? Do you want to meet in the ski slope of San Moritz? What do you got in your San Moritz file? No, how about try this? See, we're going to be living, inhabiting, traveling in artificial realities. The very concept, artificial reality, I mean, isn't that thrilling? I know a lot of people don't like the word artificial. A lot of people think that, a lot of people tell me drugs are artificial. I said, you mean marijuana has been around for 20,000 years? You call that artificial? All right, the artificial reality here is going to hook up with the psychedelic brain. Now, don't believe me. Believe the Wall Street Journal. February 2nd, look it up, Ruth. February 2nd, front page, Wall Street Journal, column 1, a big article about Jaron Lanier and virtual reality. And the headline said, electronic LSD, question mark. And there's a picture of Jaron Lanier and his dreadlocks. And the sixth paragraph down on the first page, it quotes me as saying, this is better than LSD, it's addictive, but it's legal. And the same week, look, check out the facts, Max. The same week, Forbes magazine, Forbes. Your father would be proud of me, huh? Had an article, the same stuff. These new simulated artificial reality is going to be more exciting, and it quotes me as saying again that it's better than LSD. These things. There's a genetic and historical thing going on here. There's not an accident that we started all this in the 60s when the baby boom, who had been television people, that. It's going to happen with or without us. I'll give you one tip, though. If you study the way the Republicans operate, when they start a war, they can't win. What they do is they get elected by saying we're going to fight that war. They get reelected, as Nixon did, and we all knew after Nixon got reelected, then they're going to end the war. Now, Bush was elected, after all, he's not a wimp. Look what he did to Noriega. Bush will be reelected in 1992, and immediately he'll start making peace with us. Because George Shultz said it, the war on drugs is not good for business. The question here is, what would I have done differently? Let me think about it. Thank you very much.
See, that's what moved into the office next door to me at Harvard when I was... I mean, I was really trying to be what my mother wanted. But what chance did I have? I mean, he just... Oh, it's a delight. And I really want to honor Timothy. Timothy was a person who took me out of a fate worse than death, which was being a successful citizen. And started me on a journey that I think is the richest possible journey I could have had in a lifetime. And I think that he was the first ray of light for me, and I want to honor that. I just want to add my voice by saying that this week in Congress, in a joint session of Congress, the new president of Czechoslovakia said, "Without a global revolution in the sphere of human consciousness, nothing will change for the better in the sphere of our being." And it was only a few months back that we saw the old Romanian president saying, "This will never happen here." And even now, I'm afraid President Bush and Mr. Sununu are trying to figure out how to contain the damage and potential chaos in which they lose their unstable king of the mountain position. But it is clear now that a historically irreversible process has started. And that's exactly what happened in the 60s. A historically irreversible process started. It didn't really start there, as Tim pointed out. It goes way back in all of human history. But something did happen in the 60s that was prepared for by doors of perception, that was prepared for by the beats in the 50s. Something happened that was of no less moment than what has just happened in Eastern Europe and Tiananmen Square and so on. And we are all now cleaning up after it, not in a negative sense, but figuring out what to do with the fact that it happened. And we can hardly understand the implications of what it means in our lives. And we are sitting here often feeling like we are the downtrodden. And it's quite the reverse. We have figured out how it happened. And now, as people on the platform have said in the earlier panel, now it's up to each individual one of us. The way Gandhi said, "My life is my message." Now the way each of us lives makes a statement that it did work, that it did happen. I can't really any longer be frightened of the dragons of government. I can't really, because I see how ephemeral and how paper tigerish they are. And I feel the fear in the culture. And I feel that what's required of us, it's interesting. I find myself in a funny position today because I'm caught between Rick's desire for us to put forward a good face, to be responsible researchers, to play a part in the game of Western science. And I'm also, on the other side, seeing that what has happened is far more profound than that. And that what we are doing now is trying to find a way to bring more people along through trying to legitimize our game in society. But the underground process in which psychedelics have continued to be used in the society and have come into mainstream consciousness. That goes on independent of whether we lose or win on the front we're talking about in research. Because it was just in the same way as when we did the Good Friday study of Walter Pankey. We were doing a double-blind placebo study, and all of us realized the absurdity of that. That the question of whether psychedelics was anything or not, for anybody who had taken them, was quite an irrelevant question. And yet, that study was done, and it was a brilliant product of our days at Harvard, I think. I think that Walter refused to take drugs until after he'd completed the study, so people wouldn't accuse him of what they accused us of sipping our own whiskey. And I want to point out that very recently, Rick here has done a follow-up of Walter Pankey's Good Friday study and has really gone back and found those people who turned on in Marsh Chapel at Boston University. And what he found was among the experimental group, the people that had psilocybin, long-term persisting effects included enhanced appreciation of life and nature, a deepening sense of joy, a commitment to their vocation, an enhanced appreciation of unusual experiences and emotions, increased tolerance of other religious systems, deepening equanimity in the face of difficult life crises, greater compassion for other peoples, minorities, and nature, increased subsequent participation in civil rights, anti-Vietnam, etc. Timeless eternity and death is not seen as so fearful, therefore they are willing to take more risks. Now that is almost 30 years later of a group of minister students who took psilocybin in Marsh Chapel on Good Friday. And as you recall, of the experimental subjects in the double-blind placebo study, 9 of them had some criteria that would class that as a religious mystical experience. And in the control group, 1 of the 10 had 1 of the 9 criteria. In other words, it's not nothing, if you needed to make sure to understand that. Now, I was asked to talk about what are the benefits of what we did in the 60s and what are our mistakes. Tim didn't deal with what he might have done differently. So, but I can play the straight part, which I've done doing with Tim for years. Here are the things that happened as I can see it from what started in that period. First of all, the culture broke out of the psychotomimetic model of using chemicals. That up until then, in this society, primarily these chemicals were considered psychosis-inducing and under the control of the psychiatric establishment. These chemicals started to be seen, these herbs and plants, started to be seen as sacraments, as they are used in other societies. They were used for creative purposes, and the therapeutic possibilities started to become apparent. The chemicals in the early 60s among the 15 to 25-year-olds became a rite of passage, which was shown in the Woodstock moment, in a culture very sadly lacking in rites of passage, where there is a lot of confusion about shift from childhood to maturity. That period made us clear that it wasn't just the chemical you ingested, but it was the set and setting. And here, of course, the traditions like the American Indian and the shamanic traditions. We knew all that, but we never listened to it. After I started with psychedelics, suddenly books that I had passed on the bookshelf saying what a bunch of rot suddenly became the most treasured volumes for me. Books of American Indian law, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, things like that, the Upanishads and the Vedas. In other words, it opened our link to the East and to an incredibly rich philosophical, psychological, and spiritual heritage of humanity that we had primarily been closed to, except for Max Mueller, just a very few things. It really opened us to the East, and I've been living off it ever since. And partly the way it did that was because the chemicals in the psychedelics allowed us to override our habits of thinking. And when we looked around in Western psychology for models about that, they were absent. And when we looked in the East, in things like the Visuddhimagga, there they were, very beautifully articulated. And here were a group of people in the East that we had treated really almost as barbarians, that had a wisdom about human consciousness that became our elders. And one of them, of course, became my guru. So it opened us to meditation and spiritual practices. Of course, it became faddish in the 70s, but beyond the fads of gurus and all that, there was a deep process, and there is a deep meditative investment in this society at this moment. Whether you call it stress reduction or whatever you call it, it's there, and it's growing all the time. And that's part of the result of what happened in the 60s. It opened ways for networking because it opened our horizontal power structures rather than our vertical power structures. And that's part of the information age that Tim's talking about now. In a way, it was a precursor of that in allowing us to see vertical institutions as much more ephemeral. And that was the deeper part of the shift that happened then, which I think is the most fundamental shift, which was the shift in our perception of reality. That what happened to us was what I think Einstein did to Newton. It went from treating a reality as absolute to seeing that all realities are relative. And the minute you do that, social institutions are up for grabs. That changes the whole ballgame right there. And that is one of the things that has happened, and that isn't turnable back. And that's part of why there is so much chaos in the moment in the culture, because social institutions which kept the structures going are breaking down because people don't value them. In Boston, when I was growing up, on Sunday you went to church. Now on Sunday you go to the shopping mall. That's a difference in values. Family structures broke down. And we don't have to say values, we just have to look at change. And the question is, who rides with change and who gets frightened and tries to grab at the old history? And this is a moment when changing from absolute reality to relative reality is a tremendous opportunity for growth, and it has a lot of scariness to it. But that's part of what our work is. That shift of reality started to spread into the world through minstrels like Bob Dylan and like the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead and Rolling Stones and Big Brother and on and on. And it's gotten so far now, I'll tell you how far it's gotten, that if I speak now in the Middle West, which I'll be doing in a few weeks when I'm on tour, if I speak in a relatively medium-sized city, I can look at an audience in which 70 to 80% of the audience has never taken psychedelics. They have never read Eastern literature. They've never been to the East. And I can say exactly the same things I said in 1965 or 70, which then were heard by an audience of a few people between 15 and 25, and that audience is going, yes. The audience in the Midwest is saying, yeah, we hear you. What happened? How did those values get inculcated into the culture? I think because you can't see it, you don't think it exists. But then when you get these little clues around the edge, you begin to see the profundity of what the social changes that were wrought at that point in the 60s. The Grateful Dead now is a major religious ritual, and it's on its way up. Our work with the dying, the work started really by Eric Cast and people like that way back, beautiful men. That has done incredibly in terms of awakening us, bringing death out of the closet. And a lot of the way in which now so many people want to work with the dying comes out of that kind of psychedelic process that happened in the 60s. Okay, I think I should say something about the mistakes. Of the early 60s of our research. In one way, I kind of am with Timothy. What mistakes? It was life. We did the best we could. So I don't say these in some sense of, I don't know what sense I say them in. I'll just say them. When we did that research at Harvard, very shortly after the beginning, we realized that this was a heresy to that social institution. That the Harvard is an institution committed to the intellect and to rational analytic process. And when we brought on something that dealt with intuitive, transcendent, unitive experiences, in which the intellect became a subsystem rather than the metasystem, we were taking on the priest class of the church, and we were doing it within the confines of that church. And what we were doing is going on to a football, to a tennis court with football cleats, is the way I would understand it. And I think that once we got going, because we were ingesting our own product, we lost our connection with the community around us. And I feel that this was neither our fault nor their fault. It was one of the results of the profundity of this experience that we couldn't turn away and couldn't turn back. But we did lose our support system, and we didn't slow down enough to keep it with us, because it finally got to the point of who's taken it and who hasn't. And that bridge became unbridgeable after a while. And it was shocking to us that people we loved and worked with as colleagues no longer were our colleagues. I think we got a little confused about evolution and revolution. And I think we played with the revolutionary aspects of psychedelics, when to me the far more interesting issue are the evolutionary aspects. And I think that had we been more evolved in our wisdom and not feeling we were inventing the wheel all over again, we would have had an appreciation of what the fears were of the society and how to work with those fears rather than just pitting ourselves against them. I don't think the way we did it was the only way it could have been done. I think we were over-enthusiastic about how easy behavior change would be. When I look at many of my friends that I took acid with in the 60s, I see that there's been a lot of work they've done, but there's a lot yet to do. And I remember Tim and I had a chart on the wall of how soon everybody would get enlightened. It involved putting acid in the water supply, but it still was going to be very soon. And we talked about how we would retool Detroit when nobody wanted cars anymore. But the real changes are harder. I think we downplayed the fact that the psychedelic experience isn't necessarily for everybody, and that people intuitively can be trusted. We did say this in Politics of Consciousness. We said people must control their own consciousness, and all we have a right to do is educate people as to what the issues are and where you can go and what to be careful of and what to be aware of. And I think that we were somewhat insensitive to the issues of the people that weren't really ready to handle this. My personal era, in view of the fear people have of their children, for their children, and of their children now, was in giving psychedelics to undergraduates. That started a chain, and I did that for many reasons. Sexual was not excluded. Now, but at this point, the genie is out of the bottle. Plenty of us know the difference between crack and psilocybin. Plenty of us will continue to do just what we are doing, to work on our consciousness, laws notwithstanding. Truth cannot be repressed. It cannot be legislated out of existence. Perhaps today, Judge Ginsburg won't make it to the Supreme Court. I'm not sure that's bad, actually. And only a few congressmen can admit to smoking grass. But tomorrow it will be different. Psychedelics are a healthy pseudopod of a society. And they have to be honored, and they will be honored. You understand that the government's reaction is predictable and understandable. And I feel pain for their fear of change. But change is in the air. And we can't be hypocritical and make believe that it's ever going to be the same again, because it isn't. I feel that psychedelics, just as our American Indian friends said that it was a part of his life, I feel they have changed my life in the most profound way. I honor them and will continue to honor them. And I will stand up as a person who has had psychedelics many times more than 400, which is the usual published report. And I continue to take psychedelics. If I am psychotic, I am a sample. But maybe I'm not. And maybe that was the training that was part of my preparation to be a social philosopher or a wise person in the society. This meeting is a meeting in which in all of our hearts we know truth. How it will manifest outward depends on our commitment to our own truth. Now, as we face the ecological issues of the times, the political issues of the times, change and potential chaos, people that have already dealt with that chaos of mind psychedelically will be there to lend this culture strength and equanimity in the face of uncertainty. Thank you.
Well, the first thing that is on my mind is to express, I think, almost everyone in this room feels what an extraordinary day this has been. We had one of the most wonderful women that I've known in 70,000 years on this planet, and I hereby propose the annual Oscar of psychedelia to the best actress and the best actor, and I nominate Laura Archer Huxley. And the matinee idol is getting better looking every year. Yeah. Anyway, what a performance. I predict that the next 10 years are going to be the most explosive 10 years of world history. I mean, who a year ago could have predicted what would happen in Eastern Europe? Well, present company excluded. We knew, didn't we? You know, all the pundits and the CIA experts and the RAND Corporation said, well, it took us by surprise. I mean, it came so suddenly. Well, fuck that. If you were at Woodstock in '69, if you were in Prague in '68, if you were in Paris in '68, I mean, it took a long time coming. I think that's one of the things I'd like to say. And the nice thing about it is we're all going to say different things, different perceptions, different visions, because that's the name of the game. Each of us is equipped with a 100 billion cell brain. And each brain cell has the knowledge processing capacity of a powerful computer. So between your left ear and your right ear, you've got more computing power than we never dream of. They tell us that there are more connections going on in your brain than there are atoms in the universe. I mean, we're getting, I know I sound like Carl Sagan here. What's going to happen is a continual empowerment of the individual. An empowerment of the individual. And that's why some of you are going to be concerned with committees and organizations and licenses and bureaucrats and power. That's good. I mean, go for it. I remember, as you all remember, those days when we watched the 100, 200, 500, 900,000 young people in Tiananmen Square. And I was watching it with a fairly famous left-wing, liberal, progressive intellectual. And he said to me, Timothy, these kids, they're politically naive. They're not organized. They don't know what they want. They all want Cadillacs. Like they all want to be yuppies. And I said, well, you're right there a little bit. I'd say 5% want Cadillacs. 5% want Volkswagen buses. 5% want Porsches. 5% want motorcycles. 5% want 10-speed bicycles so they can drive to see their boyfriend or girlfriend. In other words, it's pro-choice. And that's what puzzles the politicians and all the theorists. They can't, you know, what's the policy here? Where's the licensing like that? It's pro-choice. And the incredible thing, thank you. The astonishing thing about freedom, and I think I can say this for all of us with modesty, prove me wrong. But can you tell me a group of 1,000 people in world history that brought about more changes in the direction of freedom than those of us represented in this room, plus the Lenins and the Lillys and so forth? I mean, what we did for human individual freedom. But the paradoxical thing about freedom is, and I sympathize with poor Gorbachev. How about a round of applause for Gorbachev, huh? And Raisa, because she's the one behind the throne. How about Raisa, right? Yeah. I don't know if you know the story, but this is about the future. Okay. There was a scientific conference in Moscow about 3 years ago, before this all happened, and there were a lot of scientists and artists and all that, and then Yoko Ono went, and she was the one that got invited for a private audience with Gorby and Raisa. Now, this has got to be true because I read it in Rolling Stone, okay? And the story, and I've heard it also from Yoko. She was there, and Gorby said to her, "Isn't it a shame that John isn't here to sing Give Peace a Chance?" Now, at the time, in the White House was Nancy and Ronnie. Number one, they'd never heard of the song. Number two, if they had, they hated it. The point I'm making is that what we did here in a very disorganized way was heard around the world. I could go on telling you stories that prove the fact that they listened to and they watched what we were doing here. Now, one of the big lessons that I've learned over the last few years, and particularly in the last few months, is the most tricky, complicated, difficult thing to deal with is personal freedom. We're so accustomed to being told what to do and lining up to get licenses and all that, like in Bulgaria, they said, "You're free." Well, what does that mean? I mean, with 400 years under the Turks and 40 years under like that, I mean, the real interesting, tough work starts when you're free. The easiest thing to do is just, drop out, and not drop out, drop in and follow like that. And the interesting thing about it is that Gorby learned for his dismay that when you free people, they fucking go in all different directions. And you're not going to necessarily like a lot of them. When you free them, a lot of them just want to come east, and one of them want Cadillacs. Some of them, like the Armenians, just want to kill the Azerbaijanis. They've been waiting for 500 years, to kick their neighbor's ass. I mean... I believe in technology, and I believe that what we did would have been absolutely worthless if it hadn't been for the electronic technology and rock and roll records and MTV and the fax machines and the VCRs. In some of those dictatorships in Southeast Asia, they banned the television, they banned radio, they banned movies, but every village had a VCR. And what were they watching? They were watching, I don't know, pornography from Hong Kong. Who cares? Because Marshall McLuhan said it. The medium is the message. The medium determines your reality. And I see psychedelic drugs as technologies. They're simply different ways to boot up, activate your brain. So I'm going to finish now, but what's going to happen in the next 10 years is a new form of technology that's going to empower the individual 14-year-old child to suit up, put on, we call it a cyberspace suit or a virtual reality suit, in which you can literally move around the world, meet people. You can have 5 love affairs in different cities. You can be doing your business. Then you take off your suit. And here you are in the physical flesh. In other words, all the work in the future will be done by robots or by virtual reality, like that. You don't believe that? When you take off your cyber suit, then you can use the body for what it's supposed to be used for, as an instrument of sacred communication and aesthetic expression and graceful athletics. In other words, to use the body, to even transport your body to do work, you're a robot. You're a serf or you're a robot. In the future, we'll use our bodies only for sacramental exchanges or to use your body to do work in the future when you can suit up and move around like that would be like using your tongue to clean the floor or your penis to knock a nail in, literally. Do not think that when we talk about electronic realities that we're depreciating the body. We are freeing the body for what it's supposed to be used for. So what I'm saying is, watch for this technology. Now, you may think I'm joking or that I'm smoking funny drugs. But last Christmas, 700,000 Nintendo Power Gloves were sold. And kids put them on, and for the first time in human history, human beings, individuals, could put your hand through the screen of the tube that we've all been watching 7 hours a day with our nose pressed against it, watching Dan Rather's realities, or Roger Ailes and Lee Atwater and the Republican Party, great fabricators, their reality. But last Christmas, 700,000 kids could put their hand through and fight. But still, that's all right. See, McLuhan said it. The medium is the message, and if kids can do that and play ninja games through the screen, we're going to learn how to do it in any way you want. There's I must tell you one thing and then I'll stop. We are now in the position that the hunter-gatherers were in before there was any kind of artificial tools or habitation. And we're sitting here and saying, hey, I just ate this vegetable. And I could see ahead, you know, the fact we can chip a stone here, that means that pretty soon we can cut down trees, and we're going to be living in houses with wood. We're going to be in rooms where you can't see a tree or you can't see a bush. Oh, no, no, no. Yeah, we're in that same position now. The future is going to be creating electronic realities. You know, think about it, in which we will spend 5 or 6 hours of our time during the day. Now, if that frightens you, remember this horrible, horrible fact, which Tom pinches, by the way, in his new book, Vineland. How many of you read Vineland? Wow. Anyway, the average American watches television 7 hours a day. That means the average American in the most enlightened and rich country in world history lies like a sluggoid amoeboid with their optical suckers sucking junk food passively. So instead of doing it passively, we're going to empower with our technology. And I wish Jaron Lanier were here. I wish Eric Gullickson were here. I wish Ted Nelson were here. Who else I have? Autodesk, Eric Lyon. I wish they were here. Brenda Laurel. There's a group of people working on this. And so don't worry. What'd you say?
Robert Heinlein, he said.
Robert Heinlein. He was an Air Force admiral. William Gibson. How about William Gibson? How can we have a meeting without William Gibson? And anyway, a lot's going to happen. Main thing, stay sane and look for the new technology. And I love you.
and Leary began lecturing together in 1981. They are among the highest paid speakers on the college circuit. The film Return Engagement documents their debates, their diverse beliefs, and their friendship. Watergate conspirator G. Gordon Liddy was arrested in 1973 for masterminding the infamous break-in. A lawyer and former FBI agent, Liddy's trial was aggravated by his refusal to talk about his role in Watergate. After serving 4.5 years in prison, Liddy finally told all in his best-selling autobiography, Will. Timothy Leary was a respected psychology professor at Harvard when he became director of their psychedelic research project in 1960. Experimenting primarily on himself, he was called the guru of LSD and encouraged a whole generation to tune in, turn on, and drop out. Arrested in 1969 for possession of marijuana, he was sentenced, fled to Afghanistan, recaptured, and served 3.5 years in prison. Author of over 100 articles and books, his latest, Flashbacks, is his autobiography. G. Gordon Liddy, iron-willed and dangerous. Timothy Leary, poetic and controversial. Leary's life has revolved around drugs, Liddy's around guns. Together, these men helped form 2 decades of America's history. Ideological opposites, for their interview with Playboy Video magazine, Leary sat to the left, Liddy to the right.
How did you guys first meet?
We met for the first time when I arrested Tim.
Well, you actually led a raid on his house.
That's right, and I arrested him in the course of it. It was the execution of a search warrant.
What were you arrested for?
Well, actually, I was arrested for the possession of peat moss, which Mr. Liddy, who was storming around like Inspector Clouseau, Peter Sellers, you know, identified this dangerous vegetable brown substance as peat moss. So the case was subsequently thrown out of court, and the embarrassment to the establishment was avoided that way.
Well, there was indeed peat moss. There was also some vegetable matter that was a bit more potent than peat moss. And what we did was make a bargain with Dr. Leary that if he and his entourage would exit the county, we would permit him gratefully to do so. And then if he did not, we would keep trying to make a case against him.
Now, in 1966, either shortly before or after this famous raid, you said you had something like 330 psychedelic experiences. Is there any drug you won't take?
My feeling about drugs are there's no bad drug, as Barbara Woodhouse says about dogs. There's no bad dogs. They're just stupid owners or stupid users. And as a matter of pride...
I got to stop you again.
Yeah.
PCP is not a bad drug?
If used intelligently, no. I'll go on. I'll say that as a matter of pride and as a matter of public duty that I try, and I'm not compulsive about it, but I try every year to have one experiment with every illegal drug. Just as a matter of stating the American principle of frontier independence, and I will not be cowed. So that you're not going to make me cringe by throwing drug names at me.
Well, let's discuss PCP. You really don't think that's a dangerous drug?
No, I'm not urging anyone to take any drug. As a matter of fact, don't take any drug unless you really know what you're doing. I don't want anyone but intelligent, sophisticated people involved with drugs, but don't let them scare you. And PCP is not any more... I'd rather have a friend of mine on PCP than a bottle of booze any day.
You had once written, and I know you said on a number of occasions, that the people who wrote the laws in this country had never really tried the drugs that they were outlawing. I assume this is the case in your case. I assume you have not done LSD.
No, the only drug of a major sort that you could ever say that I had, I did receive in a military hospital in 1952 some morphine, and so I understand the reactions that one has to morphine. Other than that, I've had quite a bit of aspirin.
And one of the things that you said in your book, Will, is that suffering was the key to understanding a lot of different things.
Suffering is something that will either destroy you or make you stronger. To that extent, Nietzsche was quite correct. And anytime you encounter severely adverse circumstances, you have a choice. You know, you're either going to overcome it or you're going to surrender to it and be destroyed by it. And I don't really think that in that particular philosophical thought I have invented the wheel.
What was your all-time greatest sexual fantasy?
My all-time greatest sexual fantasy actually has come true with my wife, Barbara. And I believe the challenge of one woman and one man, or one man and one man, or I'm not want to be provincial here, the challenge of one-on-one is so overwhelming that the idea of trying to, 1 in 100, I'm awed by anyone that's courageous enough to try to do that. And by the way, mentioning
I got to stop you for a second. You said the man-on-man relationship. Have you had one?
No, I have never. Briefly, a college professor in my undergraduate days performed, he went down on me a couple of times, and I liked the man and felt tender to him, but that's been my only homosexual experience.
I hesitate to ask, but I will. Have you had a homosexual experience?
No, I guess I was never good looking enough to attract.
I'm going to give you a couple of names, just throw them out here, and just tell me the first thing that comes into your mind. John Dean.
Well, I know you have cautioned us that all sorts of language is acceptable on this particular channel. However, I would prefer to say that were we all together on the deck of the Titanic, Jed Magruder would be attempting to get into the lifeboat ahead of your mother. John Dean, on the other hand, would be trying to get in there ahead of his mother.
Where does John Mitchell fit in?
John Mitchell is, in my opinion, a very fine man, a man of great courage and strength. He never gave anyone so much as 30 seconds of time. It's true that they forced him to testify, but he didn't tell them anything. He kept giving them that collaborator is attached to the thermostratolap routine.
Others did not.
True.
Mr. Dean, Mr. Hunt. You reacted particularly upset when Mr. Hunt decided to talk.
Yes, the difference being that Dean's an amateur. He ought not to have been in the business in the first time.
He's a civilian.
Yeah, Howard Hunt had been not only with the Central Intelligence Agency virtually since its inception, he had been with the OSS during wartime, and he knew better.
There was a time, though, that you would actually entertain the notion, quite seriously, of going after Jack Anderson, the syndicated columnist, and Mr. Hunt himself.
Well, two separate incidents.
That's correct.
Yeah. That's true. Different incidents, different reasons.
Explain.
Well, first of all, there was never any thought of moving physically against Mr. Anderson, even after he had cost the United States of America probably one of its finest technical means of intelligence gathering we've ever enjoyed. It was not until Anderson, through his column, had revealed the identity of one of our human assets posted abroad, who was tortured to death, that I, Mr. Hunt, and a Dr. Gunn of the Central Intelligence Agency, who's an expert on assassination, were ordered to have a meeting at which we were to come up with a plan which would, quote, guarantee, end quote, that was the operative word, that Mr. Anderson would never again repeat that conduct. Well, we couldn't really see how anyone could guarantee that someone would not do something in the future without killing him, and so that was the recommendation to the White House. The White House turned it down, said that is too severe a sanction, and so there was no attempt on the life of Mr. Anderson.
Jack Anderson was a thorn in the side of the Nixon administration because he was an independent journalist. They were trying to silence his criticism of the Nixon administration. So these stories about the betrayal of CIA information, or of the alleged story of the human agent that was tortured, Anderson denies this, and this is simply the CIA trying to justify killing people that criticize it.
I would point out to you that, of course, Mr. Anderson denies it. Would you really expect him to admit it? And lastly, and I think much more significantly, the Congress of the United States, partially as a result of the incident we have just discussed, passed legislation, which is now the law of the land, so that the activities of Mr. Anderson could, if done today, be reached by law, and we would never have had to consider killing him. With respect to Mr. Hunt, by contrast, there we were together in a maximum security prison. I was the only one who could have access to him. That being the case, I anticipated that I might receive instructions to kill Mr. Hunt, to silence him. And so I prepared to be able to carry out such an assignment in the event I were to receive such instructions. Now, I never received the instructions, and so, of course, I did not kill him.
You're damn right. The CIA was afraid that Hunt would talk. And what would he talk about? Yes, he wouldn't be betraying the security of the United States. He'd be perhaps talking about inefficiencies, illegalities, brutalities, un-American activities on the part of the CIA, the bureaucratic instinct to protect itself. And if Anderson were killed, it wouldn't be to protect the United States of America, it would be to protect the asses of the boys in power.
Had you been ordered to kill Jack Anderson, would you have done it?
Yes.
Without hesitation?
Yes, for the reasons I've just explained.
If you had one thing to do over again in the last 20 years of your life, what would it have been?
I would have refused to undertake the Watergate or any similar assignment while required to be associating with the likes of Messrs. Dean and Magruder. I would have insisted on a much hardier group of associates than those two.
Dr. Leary?
If I had one regret along the lines of Gordon's, is I would have never had anything to do with a lawyer, or would I have ever had let a lawyer have any power or control over my destiny. And I think that it's obvious that if there's one group of Americans that are going to, regardless of race, creed, color, or political preference or whatever, that are going to really, and I'll use the F word here, fuck us up, it's lawyers. So that my one specific regret is having anything to do with lawyers.
Tell me, what is next for Gordon Liddy and Timothy Leary?
Well, I subscribe to the philosophy that the tennis players do. Always change a losing game, never change a winning game.
I've heard Gordon say that to me dozens of times, and I think that's the kiss of death. That's what every species had said. The dinosaurs said it, the Roman, don't change a winning game. At the present time, and for the last couple of years, I haven't been talking about drugs in my lectures nor in my writings. I'm interested in and totally involved in designing interactive software for computers, because just like drugs of the 60s, the personal computer is a wonderful opportunity to expand your consciousness and to activate new circuits and to get a better understanding of your brain, to reprogram your brain. And fortunately enough, the personal software is still legal. I don't know with Reagan in power how long it will be, so you better enjoy it while it's around.
One of the things that you pride yourself is a little bit of behavior modification work over the years. What would you like to see changed in Gordon Liddy?
Well, I don't think that it's anyone's prerogative to say what they want changed in another person. That's taking on too much responsibility. I don't believe in playing with people's minds, and that's, of course, the great lesson of the 60s. We never laid down a trip.
Just to give you an idea of how accurate Tim is stating his own views. I was a guest in his home a number of times, and I recall well one time we had dinner, and after dinner he said, "Now Gordon, you see that bowl on the table there?" I said, "Yes." He said, "That is filled with famous Amos cookies. It's okay for you to have one of those cookies. However, knowing how you feel, if I were you, I would avoid the brownies." So, given an opportunity, to do that kind of thing, he didn't do it.
You blew your chance, Gordon.
How are the cookies?
The cookies, a little dry, but otherwise all right.
The brownies were great.
Good evening. Usually I talk with you from my office in the West Wing of the White House, but tonight there's something special to talk about, and I've asked someone very special to join me. Nancy and I are here in the West Hall of the White House, and around us are the rooms in which we live. It's the home you've provided for us, of which we merely have temporary custody. Nancy's joining me because the message this evening is not my message, but ours. Despite our best efforts, shortages of marijuana are now being reported. From the early days of our administration, Nancy has been using marijuana on a daily basis, and her personal observations and efforts have given her such dramatic insights that I wanted her to share them with you this evening. Nancy?
Thank you. For 5 years, I've been traveling across the country, learning and listening. And one of the most hopeful signs I've seen is this new drug, crack. Each time I meet with someone new, I yearn to find a way to help share the message that drugs open your eyes to life, to see it in the vivid colors that God gave us as a precious gift to his children, to enjoy life to the fullest and to make it count. So to my young friends out there, life can be great. And when it comes to drugs and alcohol, there's a big, wonderful world out there for you. It belongs to you.
I think you can see why Nancy has been such a positive influence on all that we're trying to do. The job ahead of us is very clear. Nancy's personal crusade to expand the use of smokable cocaine, otherwise known as crack, should become our national crusade. It must include a combination of government and private efforts which complement one another.
Our young people are helping us lead the way. Not long ago in Oakland, California, I was asked by a group of children what to do if they were offered drugs. Say yes, I answered. Soon after that, those children in Oakland formed a Just Say Yes club. And now there are over 10,000 such clubs all over the country.
America has accomplished so much in these last few years, whether it's been rebuilding our economy or serving the cause of freedom in the world. What we've been able to achieve has been done with your help, with us working together as a nation united. Now, we need your support again. Drugs are the mightiest force for good that we know. They're simply wonderful to the young people on whom our future depends.
Many of you may be thinking, well, drugs don't concern me. but it does concern you. It concerns us all because of the way it could fulfill the promise and hope in those restless minds. Drug and alcohol abuse needs our encouragement.
In this crusade, let us not forget who we are. Drug abuse is a freedom that is ours. You are Americans. You're the product of the freest society mankind has ever known. No one ever has the right to separate the drugs from the customer.
Say yes to drugs to the point of making others uncomfortable, even if it meaning making ourselves unpopular.
And drug abuse is not a crime. Drugs and excessive alcohol are used by former Attorney General Meese.
Drugs help us create love and hope and trust and confidence, and cocaine makes me happy.
Think for a moment how special it is to be an American. Can we doubt that only a divine providence placed this land, this island of freedom, here as a refuge for all those so-called drug criminals who yearn to breathe free? The revolution out of which our liberty was conceived signaled an historical call to substance abusers and the chemically dependent.
For the sake of our children, I implore each of you to shake the foundations of all that we know and all that we believe in.
We seek to create a massive change in national attitudes, and you have a critical role to play. You can help others by providing cocaine and excessive alcohol to those in need. Being friends to others is the best way of being friends to ourselves.
It's up to us to change attitudes and just simply enjoy life to the fullest with a cocaine habit.
And in the most important area, individual use, we see progress. The U.S. military has more than tripled the use of drugs among its personnel since 1980. Tonight, I can report to you that Vice President Bush smokes marijuana regularly. And there's one more thing. Nancy and I are hooked on heroin.
Each of us was once strung out on several drugs.
Here in the White House, drugs are a constant temptation, but we still have much to do. Our goal is to expand drug trafficking at all levels of government and in the private sector. Help us.
And finally, to young people watching or listening, I have a very personal message for you. Every time a drug goes into a child, it's exciting and stimulating and rewarding. Don't cheat yourselves out of this promise. And now we go on to the next stop, making a final commitment. Say yes to drugs anytime, any place. So won't you join us in this great new national crusade?
God bless you, and good night.
do agree with you. I think the difference between the 1960s and the 1990s in terms of these psychedelic compounds is that the 60s entirely lacked any awareness of shamanism or the historical role that these substances had played throughout human history and prehistory. The 60s believed they were inventing this reality for the first time. Now that we have been able to compare the psychedelic experience to the way it is done in the Amazon, in West Africa, in areas where these things have been used and understood for a long time, we now have a model. And it's the model not that you take low doses and go with your friends to a rock concert, but that you take high doses in a situation of sensory isolation, such as a quiet, dark room, and make an inward journey into the self that parallels the journey that shamans have always made to recover lost souls or to cure or to discover the whereabouts of lost objects. So in a way, the psychedelic exploration has gained power, respectability, and legitimacy by discovering that its own roots were in a Paleolithic religion of great power and wide distribution. In other words, psychedelic voyaging is not something new. This is how religion was done for the first million years, not the last 2,000 years. This is really the only exception to this rule. And I agree with what you also said about how vast this domain seems to be. Serious psychedelic voyagers, I think, can agree the further in you go to this realm, the larger it appears to be. Really what we are doing is we are discovering the inner richness of organism. That, you know, the richness of the human world is not in owning stuff. The richness of the human world is lies in being able to access what is within us. Our minds are not blank slates or merely repositories of traumatic memory. Our minds are doorways into an infinite labyrinth, a kind of Borgesian library of infinite possibilities, and we can choose to open these doorways in whatever sequence or fashion we wish.
That 20,000 years ago on the plains of Africa was the expansion of the human diet, the restless search for new food sources that led our primitive ancestors to include mushrooms in their diet that contained psilocybin, and out of that synergistic bootstrapping effect springs the whole spectrum of cultural effects, religion, language, poetry, magic, dance, all of these unique expressions of humanness come out of the restlessness of primate organization and the synergy of psychoactive psilocybin in the hominid diet. This is the real missing link. This is the real key to what the factors were that called us forth into humanness. Shall we talk about language? Well, first of all, let's talk about ordinary language, which is probably the closest thing to a miracle in the natural world. It's the major neurological manifestation of difference between ourselves and other animals and primates. And it's not a physiological difference. It's a difference in behavior. That language represents the most complex behavior ever observed in any animal. And certainly it's the most complex thing any of us ever learns to do. We're born into what William James calls a blooming, buzzing confusion. But by the acquisition of words, we mosaic over various sectors of this blooming, buzzing confusion with words. We replace the unknown with the known through the substitution of words. And by the time a child is 2 or 3, they have completely created a cultural mosaic of words that is interposed between them and reality. Reality from that point on is only an unconfirmed rumor brought through the medium of language. And every culture accentuates different parts of reality, so that in a sense, every culture is a different reality. Language is the stuff of the world, not quarks or wave packets or neutrinos, but language. Everything is made of language. All the constructs of science are actually interlocking constructs of syntax. Well, so that's ordinary language, which seems to define reality through a kind of process of lying about it. For instance, by creating subject-object distinctions, which are, in fact, not true to the matter, but somehow operationally necessary for us to navigate in the kind of lower dimensional space that we inhabit. Then there is the phenomenon of non-ordinary, or what I call visible language. And this is very interesting to me. This is where technology, virtual reality, cybernetics, human-machine interfacing can actually make an impact and explore a frontier. Visual language is a transformation of the physiological impulse towards syntax into a final product, speech, which is not heard with the ears, but beheld with the eyes. And it's very interesting that all our metaphors of clarity of speech are visual metaphors. We say, I see what you mean. He spoke clearly. This means that at the organismic level, we associate a higher signal clarity with visual input. And on DMT and other tryptamine psychedelics, you actually experience the field of language, both heard and self-generated, as something that is visibly beheld. It's almost as though the project of communication becomes high-speed sculpture in a conceptual dimension made of light and intentionality. Well, this would remain a kind of esoteric performance on the part of shamans at the height of intoxication if it were not for the fact that electronics and electronic cultural media and computers make it possible for us to actually create records of these higher linguistic modalities. In other words, it's possible to imagine a virtual reality that was driven by a speech-operated synthesizer where the various parts of ordinary speech, adjectives, modifiers, subjects, and objects, were interpreted by the cybernetic environment as topological manifolds of various shapes, so that speech would then generate a visibly beheld topology. And it's possible to imagine a future world where in setting up marriage contracts or negotiating corporate takeovers, in other words, in areas where communication, clear expression of intentionality was very important, that people would actually go into the virtual reality to use the virtual language because its capacity for conveying intent would be much greater than ordinary spoken language. In other words, it's not for nothing that Plato connected up the notion of the good, the true, and ultimately the beautiful. And the beautiful of those three concepts is the primary concept because it is visibly beheld, because it is seen. This is the great convincing power of the psychedelic experience, that it ultimately appeals to us through the sense that we value most, that we existentially relate to as the most authentic, and that is the visual. Visible language is a kind of telepathy, because you see, if I make a statement in visual language and then you and I regard my statement, we are somehow in the act of regarding made one, because meaning is not being created out of interiorized dictionaries, which we each consult in the privacy of our own mind, but rather meaning is a visible manifold in the public domain. Meaning goes public, and the differences between people then decline toward being insignificant. It's a kind of a final confirmation of the McLuhan apotheosis. And I think visible language is coming. Life in the imagination is to be the life of creativity carried on through these virtual environments driven by linguistic engines. Like that. Good. Did it look good?
Oh, that's pretty. Yeah, well, this is a good graph for this one, because it can happen while you're...
but that the starships of the future, in other words, the vehicles of the future which will explore the high frontier of the unknown, will be syntactical vehicles. I mean, the engineers of the future will be poets. This is what virtual reality holds out to us, the possibility of walking in to the constructs of the imagination. In a way, culture is that. I mean, our cities, bridges, highways, airliners, and art galleries are condensations out of the imagination, but at tremendous cost, because we must make them out of matter. Once we can make them out of light, out of electrons, then we won't build skyscrapers 120 stories high. We'll build them as high as we want. Roof height will no longer be a factor ruled by cost effectiveness and gravity. It will be a parameter ruled by the imagination, as will all other parameters. And then we will discover what man truly is, when we are able to erect, stabilize, share, and explore our dreams in a kind of virtual hyperspace that, carefully analyzed, is seen to be linguistic. That's what its connectors are made out of. That's what its ferroconcrete and steel is the edifice of language. This is what the stuff of the imagination is made of. And I think this is what we're moving toward. The psychedelic shamans have always known this. Now the psychedelic underground art community points toward this goal and leads the way.
Long ago, when these ancient Grecian temples were new, hemp was already old in the service of mankind. For thousands of years even then, this plant had been grown for cordage and coarse cloth in China and elsewhere in the East. For centuries prior to about 1850, all the ships that sailed the western seas were rigged with hempen rope and sails. For the sailor, no less than the hangman, hemp was indispensable. A 44-gun frigate, like our cherished old Ironsides, took over 60 tons of hemp for rigging, including an anchor cable 25 inches in circumference. The Conestoga wagons and prairie schooners of pioneer days were covered with hempen canvas. Indeed, the very word canvas comes from the Arabic word for hemp. In those days, hemp was an important crop in Kentucky and Missouri. Then came cheaper imported fibers for cordage, like jute, sisal, and manila hemp, and the culture of hemp in America declined. But now, with Philippine and East Indian sources of hemp in the hands of the Japanese, and shipment of jute from India curtailed, American hemp must meet the needs of our Army and Navy, as well as of our industries. In 1942, patriotic farmers, at the government's request, planted 36,000 acres of seed hemp, an increase of several thousand %. The goal for 1943 is 50,000 acres of seed hemp. In Kentucky, Kentucky, much of the seed hemp acreage is on river bottom land such as this, along the Kentucky River Gorge. Some of these fields are inaccessible except by boat. Thus, plans are afoot for a great expansion of the hemp industry as a part of the war program. This film is designed to tell farmers how to handle this ancient crop, now little known outside Kentucky and Wisconsin. This is hemp seed. Be careful how you use it. For to grow hemp legally, you must have a federal registration and tax stamp. This is provided for in your contract. Ask your AAA committeeman or your county agent about it. Don't forget, hemp demands a rich, well-drained soil such as is found here in the bluegrass region of Kentucky or in central Wisconsin. It must be loose and rich in organic matter. Poor soils won't do. Soil that will grow good corn will usually grow hemp. Hemp is not hard on the soil. In Kentucky, it has been grown for several years on the same ground, though this practice is not recommended. A dense and shady crop, hemp tends to choke out weeds. Here's a Canada thistle that couldn't stand the competition. Dead as a dodo. Thus, hemp leaves the ground in good condition for the following crop. For fiber, hemp should be sown 5 pecks to the acre. With drill, the closer the rows, the better. These rows are spaced about 4 inches. This hemp has been broadcast. Either way, it should be sown thick enough to grow a slender stalk. Here's an ideal stand. The right height to be harvested easily, thick enough to grow slender stalks that are easy to cut and process. Stalks like these here on the left, they yield the most fiber and the best. Those on the right are too coarse and woody. For seed, hemp is planted in hills like corn, sometimes by hand. Hemp is a dioecious plant. The female flower is inconspicuous, but the male flower is easily spotted. In seed production, after the pollen has been shed, these male plants are cut out. These are the seeds on a female plant. Hemp for fiber is ready to harvest when the pollen is shedding and the leaves are falling. In Kentucky, hemp harvest comes in August. Here, the old standby has been the self-rake reaper, which has been used for a generation or more. Hemp grows so luxuriantly in Kentucky that harvesting is sometimes difficult, which may account for the popularity of the self-rake with its lateral stroke. A modified rice binder has been used to some extent. This machine works well in average hemp. Recently, the improved hemp harvester, used for many years in Wisconsin, has been introduced in Kentucky. This machine spreads the hemp in a continuous swath. It is a far cry from this fast and efficient modern harvester to the Armstrong model of yore. But here's one kind of harvester, at least, that doesn't stall in the heaviest hemp. In Kentucky, hand cutting is practiced in opening fields for the machines. In Kentucky, hemp is shucked as soon as safe after cutting, to be spread out for retting later in the fall. In Wisconsin, hemp is harvested in September. Here, the hemp harvester with automatic spreader is standard equipment. Note how smoothly the rotating apron lays the swath preparatory to retting. Here it is a common and essential practice to leave headlands around hemp fields. These strips may be planted to other crops, preferably small grain. Thus, the harvester has room to make its first round without preparatory hand cutting. Here, the machine is running over corn stubble. When the cutter bar is much shorter than the hemp is tall, overlapping occurs. Not so good for retting. The standard cut is 8 to 9 feet. The length of time hemp is left on the ground to rot depends on the weather. The swaths must be turned to get a uniform ret. When the woody core breaks away readily, like this, the hemp is about ready to take up and bind into bundles. Well-retted hemp is light to dark gray. The fiber tends to pull away from the stalk. The presence of stalks in the bowstring stage indicates that retting is well underway. When hemp is short or tangled, or when the ground is too wet for machines, it is bound by hand. A wooden buck is used. Twine will do for tying, but the hemp itself makes a good band. When conditions are favorable, the pickup bander is commonly used. The swaths should lie smooth and even with stalks parallel. The picker won't work well in tangled hemp. After binding, hemp is shucked as soon as possible to stop further retting. In 1942, 14,000 acres of fiber hemp were harvested in the United States. The goal for 1943 is 300,000 acres. Thus, hemp, Cannabis sativa, the old standby cordage fiber, is staging a strong comeback. This is Kentucky hemp going into the dryer of a mill at Versailles. In the old days, breaking was done by hand, one of the hardest jobs known to man. Now the power breaker makes quick work of it. Spinning American hemp into rope yarn or twine in the old Kentucky River Mill at Frankfort, Kentucky. Another pioneer plant that has been making cordage for more than a century. All such plants will presently be turning out products spun from American-grown hemp. Twine of various kinds for tying, winding armatures, and upholsterers' work. Rope for marine rigging and towing, for hay forks, derricks, and heavy-duty tackle. Light-duty fire hose. Thread for shoes for millions of American soldiers. And parachute webbing for our paratroopers. As for the United States Navy, every battleship requires 34,000 feet of rope, and other craft accordingly. So here in the Boston Navy Yard, where cables for frigates were made long ago, crews are now working night and day making cordage for the fleet. In the old days, rope yarn was spun by hand. Today, even the rope walk is mechanized. 160 fathoms to go. The rope yarn feeds through holes in an iron plate. This is Manila hemp from the Navy's rapidly dwindling reserve. When that is gone, American hemp will go on duty again. Hemp for mooring ships. Hemp for tow lines. Hemp for tackle and gear. Hemp for countless naval uses, both on ship and shore. Just as in the days when old Ironside sailed the seas victorious, with her hempen shrouds and hempen sails. Hemp for victory.
There. So the question of all this is, what are the clinical implications of this for human users of MDMA? Well, the answer is basically, I mean, if you're going to give the only honest answer you can give, the answer is basically that we don't know. Part of this is because we don't understand the functions of serotonin very well. So we can't put our finger on some clinical pathology to some clearly clinical deficit and say, you know, in the human user, you know, you can't sleep or you can't remember or you cannot function sexually or whatever and say, and that's because you used high doses of MDMA. We can't do that because we don't understand what serotonin is doing. So it's hard to say what would happen if the serotonin system were markedly impaired. There's some reason for reassurance, however, in the fact that no obvious clinical or neurological deficit has come to light in people that have been taking fenfluramine daily for years as an appetite suppressant. Fenfluramine is even more toxic than MDMA, and it seems that if there were long-term dangerous side effects from the ingestion of these serotonin-type neurotoxins, they would have come to light by this time because it's been around since 1968. Similarly, you could single out MDMA's chemical relative, MDA, which has been around for a long time and has been taken for a lot of people. But in that case, the clinical population is much less well defined because people that took MDA 20 years ago were likely to have taken many different kinds of drugs. So you can't really single out the effects of MDMA. But so in that sense, the people who have taken fenfluramine, nothing has come to light, and as far as I'm aware, there's no effort to take fenfluramine off the market because it's a serotonin neurotoxin. This may also be because it has a certain advocacy in the sense that the pharmaceutical company that manufactures it has a certain stake in seeing it remain on the market. But until we know more about the functions of serotonin, about the possible implications of these long-term effects and whether they happen in humans or not, we don't know. But until we know more, I would say that caution is advised, and caution in two respects. One is we should exercise a certain caution in the frequency and the size of doses of MDMA that people use, because the animal data shows that it's a question of dose frequency and the size of the dose both bear a direct correlation to the appearance of this neurotoxicity. The second kind of caution that I would advocate is a certain caution in extrapolating the results of animal studies to humans. We're treading on thin ice here. What we're in danger of doing is committing a misuse or an abuse of scientific information. And since science depends for its credibility on its objectivity, I think that there's reason to be careful. The point is, this phenomenon is relatively well understood in humans, and it's relatively poorly understood. That is, it's relatively well understood in animals and rather poorly understood in humans. Until we know more, caution on a number of fronts is advisable. But for right now, the evidence is that at the dose